When Harry was drugging Carol, she would spend days and days in bed, unable to speak.
The medication he was obtaining and applying to his wife was not designed to make her feel better, but perhaps to make her feel worse.
Harry wrapped her body in a duvet and put her under a gap in the floorboards.
Harry Jarvis was a totally unexceptional individual to look at. He was very brazen about the whole thing. You know, put your lover up in a shed in the garden just outside the window where your wife is.
Harry was determined to do what he did, to get what he wanted out of it, to do away with Carol and move on with Rita. That was all that Harry cared about.
Just that worry in the back of your mind of, is he Dad or is he Harry the killer?
Carol Jarvis had been reported missing 2 days before she was found dead.
Initially, the missing persons report had come in from Carol's children to say that they hadn't seen their mum for some time, and that their father had said to them that she was away on respite care up in Dundee.
When she disappeared, his reaction was, she's left the house, she's gone away. It's just utterly bizarre because she'd been bedbound for a significant amount of time.
I decided to phone the police just to report a missing person. The police visited the house just to establish what had went on.
A body was then discovered.
I remember hearing on the news that a body had been found in a house in Bathgate, which was the area that my practice was based in, West Lothian. I was interested to know what was going to happen with the people who were being charged with murder.
The police in Bathgate had discovered Carol's remains under the floorboards in the house. There were clear signs there was a body. It had become a deposition site. Thoughts very quickly from the police turned to, there's only one suspect in this case, and it's her husband.
Well, it was a very tragic case, but from the perspective of those working as lawyers in the case, it was totally unique. The background to the death of Harry Jarvis's wife was bizarre. He was very brazen about the whole thing. You know, put your lover up in a shed in the garden just outside the window where your wife is.
This looked like, on the surface, potentially quite a well-planned murder. But actually, there were so many issues within Harry's plan for this.
You couldn't make it up. I don't think he was particularly clever. He had some degree of intelligence, but he did a number of very foolish things. The whole setup at the house was bizarre.
Harry Jarvis and his wife Carol had 4 children. Graham is the youngest son.
This one year's mum and dad was very young. Dad looks really, really young there. Mum's not wearing glasses, so that's why that must have been one when they were growing up together. But she looks happy.
Graham was told his father was probably her killer, and he was nowhere to be seen.
If your spouse has just been found dead in the floor space in your house, your natural reaction as a grieving spouse would be to stay, to help the police with their inquiries, to support the children, to plan the funeral. So the fact that he absconded and was nowhere to be seen would have immediately raised suspicions.
How can you see that somebody is going to do that? Unless they've wheeled in an axe or they've got a gun, then you can't suspect that somebody's going to just hatch a plan to kill somebody or do it spur of the moment. You can't foresee that at all.
It's going to be really tough for anyone who loses a parent to something as violent as a murder. But even more so when the person who took their life is their other parent. There's going to be a real conflict there between still loving a parent, as most people do, and hating them for what they've done.
Harry Jarvis met his future wife Carol in the late 1970s when he was living in South London and working as a bus driver.
I believe they met just with Mum working in the shoe shop, and then just Dad asking her out on a date. Mum was 18, Dad was 30, so a 12-year difference. People might say, oh, that's a big gap, but sometimes there's a connection or whatever it may be, it might just be it.
By 1982, Carol and Harry Jarvis were married, and the couple went on to have 4 children together.
I just thought Mum and Dad were happy as a couple. You know, they argued like any other couple would, and, you know, money or life worries, but for me, yeah, they were just a general, normal, happy Mum and Dad couple.
In the early 1990s, the Jarvis family moved over 400 miles away from London, settling in the West Lothian town of Bathgate in Scotland.
We settled in this house. A lot of the childhood memories and friends and neighbours, and even sort of family gatherings happened in that house. She would be the first one up dancing or trying to cheer you up, and yeah, generally quite a bit dozy, but really sort of lively character when she wanted to be. She was just a mum that was there for you. Her main sort of life was centred around the kids and, you know, the kids' extra activities such as the brownies, the guides. On the off chance she did have a cup of tea with a friend, it would be from her friends across the road, the house, or our next door neighbour. So generally just a very, very quiet life centred around the 4 kids.
Carol was left to deal with the day-to-day running of the house and the children, and she had to see to everybody's needs because Harry was, you know, in and out of prison all the time.
Probably about 97, 98 maybe. I remember visiting him in Stockton, so he was in jail then for whatever reason, again I'm not sure. Obviously if he was in prison, Mum had the kids and sort of was left to bring us up.
Harry was a petty criminal, regularly committing low-level crimes such as deception, minor fraud, and shoplifting.
After the London buses, Dad never really had a permanent sort of career, a permanent job to hold down.
He did try at times to hold down lawful employment and did try and become a fairly decent person. But it wasn't long before he would be enticed back into breaking the law again.
Anytime he was in prison or every time he'd done a disappearing act and then came back, it was just normal, nothing changed. There was never any talk about like sort of Mum and Dad splitting up or any changes at all. It just went back to everyday life.
When Harry Jarvis was out of prison, there were still times when he would go missing from the family home without warning.
Dad used to disappear, you know, right from when I was a young kid, right up until, you know, the last sort of days of seeing him. He would go anywhere from the local pub to ending up at his brother's down south to, you know, just no explanation given at all.
For the family, the difficulties occurred when Harry was out of prison but would just then disappear for periods of time, which would cause Carol real anxiety.
It just became the norm, whereby it was like, oh, you know, we used to come home and Dad wasn't there, and then sort of Mum would be a wee bit upset.
That level of anxiety, no matter how hard she tried to shield her children from it, would have been almost impossible, because they would have picked up on Mum's not okay and Dad's missing. And that would have caused some level of uncertainty and instability within the family fold.
It was almost like Mum was fending for herself and looking after the four of us, and that's when it kind of began to spiral out of control.
Seeing their mum treated in that way would have had a massive impact on their family. Children are supposed to be protected, whereas they will have felt quite protective of their mother because of Harry's behaviour.
Dad could do a lot of stuff, and they used to fight like can dog, but I don't think anybody could ever turn around and go, my dad's got it in him to kill somebody.
Bathgate in Scotland was the Jarvis' family home for 18 years.
Bathgate used to be home where I grew up, really. So I know the streets like the back of my hand.
Bathgate is a very average Scottish town with a very close-knit community. Most likely the locals would say nothing exciting ever happens here.
Sometimes drive by when I'm in Bathgate, just I'll drive by or just sit out of the house just for a couple of minutes, just as a wee sort of memory to let Mum know that I'm still thinking about her, and lets me get on with my day and life, really.
He felt quite resentful that he had a wife and children. He lived very much a playboy lifestyle, but didn't really have the cash to do so. So that's where, you know, he would fleece Carol and any other woman who had the misfortune to meet him.
Carol was aware that Harry had lots of other relationships outside of the marriage, and I think she tolerated that because for her, her central narrative was to get him back.
Carol Jarvis had been battling ill health, and soon after moving to Bathgate, was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and muscle degeneration. At that time, Graham had just turned 13.
Initially, Mum used to just be tired and fatigued, and she used to sort of stay in bed a little bit. And she used to sort of complain about having sore muscles. So that's my first memory of her being ill, I feel like, in terms of not being able to get out of bed as much.
As Carol's health deteriorated further, Harry Jarvis became his wife's carer.
I don't think Harry was a particularly caring individual. Would have relished the idea of having to care for Carol, but actually he probably saw that as a bit of an excuse not to have a job, not to have to go to work every day, and he saw it as an opportunity for financial gain as well, because he used her money that she got to support her with having a disability for his own gain, going out to the pub, betting.
He didn't think anything of just leaving Carol and the kids for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time.
He was somebody who liked things to go his way. Anybody who came into his sphere was used and manipulated by him.
Carol would take to bed, particularly if she was having a depressive episode. He would maybe play the attentive husband for a while, but quickly got very bored of that. He would do his usual disappearing acts for quite a long time, come backwards and forwards. Carol absolutely adored Harry. He was able to wheedle his way back in and charm her.
Looking back at it now, I think to myself, how did she manage to do that all? You know, I sort of got the kids now, and life's a struggle. So, yeah, fair play to Mum. She was one of a kind.
As they became adults, Graham and his siblings each moved away from the family home.
I left when I was 16. I went to stay with my friend through college and then uni. Obviously in term time or at the weekends I used to go back. So I was like sort of back and forward.
Harry Jarvis was now living alone in the house with his wife Carol.
Harry Jarvis was involved in procuring the medication for Carol Jarvis. There were circumstances attached to that which would have indicated that he wasn't perhaps acting in her best interests. There was an indication that the medication he was obtaining and applying to his wife was not designed to make her feel better, but perhaps to make her feel worse.
Every time I went round, everything was normal in terms of Dad was there and Mum was there. There was nothing sort of untoward.
When Harry was drugging Carol, she would spend days and days in bed, unable to speak. She was very drowsy. She would sleep most of the time. The children would pop in and out. She was incapable of holding conversation, and purely because Harry was drugging her.
When he used to disappear and then we used to try and sort of take over or help out the care between the siblings, Mum used to perk up and we noticed a sort of difference when he wasn't there to when he was there.
The fact that she was up and down could have been put down to something like fibromyalgia, rather than the direct correlation of her improving when Harry was away versus worsening when he was around.
Conversations between me and the sister or brothers was almost like, why is it that, when Dad's away, then like she's up and about, and not even questioning it, just sort of like, oh wow, mum's actually up, she's doing stuff.
People who use poison or drugs to subdue a person for their own gain or to ultimately murder somebody, as Harry did, they're very weak individuals. It's something that can be done quietly, almost with minimal fuss and effort. Drugging somebody makes them easier to look after.
I feel like you never thought, oh wait a minute here, like eventually that's gonna kill her, and that's a tough one.
On September 11th, 2009, Graham unexpectedly bumped into his dad, Harry, in Bathgate town centre.
The Friday, I seen him at the market. He looked a bit dazed and confused, asked for a couple of pound. Never thought anything of it. I had actually asked him, like, where's Mum? And he said that she's in the house sleeping.
Graham noticed a woman trailing behind Harry. Unbeknownst to him, this was his father's latest lover.
I didn't link the two of them together, but for whatever reason, that memory still comes back to me. Like, how did I remember like a total stranger sort of behind Dad? Like, was she that close to him?
Graham told his eldest brother Kevin about their dad's strange behavior at the market. So Kevin headed to the family home to check on his parents. His mom was nowhere to be seen. and Harry was being evasive about her whereabouts.
This was so out of the ordinary that Carol would disappear without telling her children where she was going.
Just wanted to find out where Mum was, you know, in terms of making sure she was all right, and yeah, just something didn't add up.
The children of Harry and Carol Jarvis came to the house, and Harry Jarvis seemed to do all he could to prevent them entering the house. It was complete manipulation by Harry Jarvis, just to keep them out of his way.
He gave us some story about he was moving to Dundee with Mum, and she was up in Dundee.
Graham decided to call the police.
The police turned up to the house to see if they could establish Carol's whereabouts.
When police entered the property, they found a woman in Carol's bed who was not Carol, despite what she was claiming. Now, fortunately, one of the officers had previously met Carol, so realised that this was not Carol Jarvis. It would have been at that point where there's a strange woman in the bed, Carol is missing. This is really going to raise alarm bells for police.
The mystery person under the bed was a woman called Rita Haster.
It became apparent that there was this person called Rita. We had never really experienced Rita before.
And there was still no sign of Carol Jarvis.
The police, you know, said to us that, you know, that Mum was an adult and there's nothing they could do for 24 hours. I had no idea what was coming.
The police in Bathgate had discovered Carol's remains under the floorboards.
Carol Jarvis had been reported missing. Outside the Jarvis family home, Rita Haster had been revealed as the mystery woman found in the house.
There was another person in the house that Dad had claimed to be Mum. On the night, we had no idea as to who she would be.
When Graham saw the woman, he immediately recognized her. She was the woman he'd seen with his dad just before Carol's disappearance.
He was in the market, and I remember her trailing behind him. For some bizarre reason, she had a suitcase, and again, I didn't link the two of them together, but for whatever reason, that memory still comes back to me.
Harry met Rita Haster in 2008 on the internet and immediately hit it off. And of course, when Rita told him who her family was, very well known, very famous, very wealthy bakers, he immediately decided that she was going to be his next partner, purely for financial gain. We're talking millions of pounds. That's the big attraction for Harry. Rita's money.
He was a very manipulative individual. He was a liar. And he, I think, showed narcissistic tendencies. He cared about nobody else, really, other than Harry Jarvis.
Rita was an heiress, and a lot is made about the fact that she was in this position. But financially, she was actually in quite a dire situation. She'd lost her house, she'd squandered her fortune. So it's almost like he's the protector in this role, and Carol's the enemy that needs to be removed. So him and Rita can be together and he can save her.
You've got Harry at the center of this family picture, with everyone else orbiting around him, almost like objects in his game, and he's moving the pieces. Absolutely horrendous.
Initially, the missing persons report had come in from Carol's children to say that they hadn't seen their mum for some time.
You're probably just thinking, where's mum? You know, has he left her somewhere or in a hotel or has he sent her to the shops? And I'm not too sure, but yeah, you don't think of the worst case scenario.
Police said that they would conduct a further search to try and ascertain where Carol Jarvis was.
After 24 hours, Carol was still missing. Police returned to the Jarvis's house. Harry and Rita Haster were no longer there.
They had said, right, we'll go around the house to see if she's got her bus pass, her purse, her bag, if they've any recent photos of her so they can log it.
The police did discover something unusual in the garden shed.
Rita Haster had been living in the shed.
So you've got a missing woman who was very unwell. You've got a missing husband who has just disappeared. And then they found someone's actually been living in the shed. This is a very, very absurd situation.
The conditions there, dirty, grubby, basic. For anyone to live in those squalid conditions was a great surprise to me.
The shed in the garden was a very basic 6x6 garden shed. There was a tiny window in it, and Rita lived in the garden in the shed, which basically just had a single mattress and a blanket.
No toilet facilities existed. There were improvised facilities in the form of a bucket, and that was about it. The shed was right outside the windows of the house. It wasn't far away, only a matter of feet. And really, the shed was so close to the house that it surprised me that that's exactly where it was.
Harry may have been incredibly good at finding victims who were susceptible to his charms. You can see that with the relationship with Rita, persuading her to live in the shed. If you find the right target, a person can be very charmed and hopeful.
We didn't really know anything about her until the Monday night. It was almost like this Rita woman, the lover that was hiding in the shed. Bizarre.
I have no reason to believe that she was there under any duress. I do think she was there, from the evidence, under the manipulative aspects of Harry Jarvis's character, and he persuaded her to go there. I'm not saying that was against her will, but I'm sure that this was his initiative and that this is what he wanted.
Rita's residence in the shed was unfortunately not the only discovery the police made at the Jarvis house.
When the police came round, they said, look, listen, we've found a body in the house, and obviously we knew that would be Mum. If you're looking for a person and they find a body, there's a good chance it's not going to be somebody else, is it?
What had been a missing person case was now a homicide investigation.
Harry was determined to do what he did to get what he wanted out of it, which was to do away with Carol and move on with Rita. That was all that Harry cared about. For Graham, what he's caring about is a lot bigger.
Just gut-wrenching. You've almost prepared for yourself for 2 days that, you know, something bad's happened, and you're kind of stopping yourself from thinking the worst.
Nobody knows exactly when Carol Jarvis died, but sometime between September 11th and September the 15th, 2009. The police in Bathgate had discovered Carol's remains under the floorboards in the house. Apparently the children used to play in that exact spot.
There was 2 basements. The rear one in the living room is where they found her. We used to go down there as kids and play like hide and seek. They used to have a mini kids snooker table down there and stuff. Hearing that from the police, again, it just makes you sick. It was just horrific. It was just horrendous, man. Like, I was sick.
Harry was so blinded by his obsession with Rita, he just wasn't thinking about consequences or next steps. He wanted to be with Rita. He saw that Carol was in the way of that. Therefore, remove Carol and he's free to be with Rita. That's probably about as sophisticated as it got.
Carol's husband, Harry Jarvis, had last been seen in the house the day before with Rita Hayster. Police needed to find the couple urgently.
I'd got a text message from a police contact who said that there had been a body found in a house in Bathgate. It became very apparent very quickly that they had a suspect close to home for this.
The police basically said to us, listen, we're trying to find your dad. We don't know where he is. Just that sort of worry in the back of your mind as to, wait a minute here, like, is he dad or is he Harry the killer? I can't believe that he could have been a killer or was a killer. I still sit here in disbelief that that's happened.
Harry and Rita were on the run. With Carol found dead in the basement and evidence that Rita had been living in the shed for some time, they were both now prime suspects for Carol's murder.
Harry and Rita spent the night in a B&B, and the next morning they disappeared without paying. The owners of the B&B phoned the police and gave a description of the people that had just left without paying.
Police tracked down the couple the day after Carol's body was discovered, arresting them as they got off a bus in Edinburgh. Both were charged with murder.
They released him on bail and there was still the court process to go through. It was almost like he was still dad, and I think the 4 of us spoke and was like, oh, we're just going to need to try and help him somehow. Giving him like sort of a jacket or money to go and stay somewhere. You didn't think it was possible. It was almost that moral compass of like, Mum would want us to help him out.
I can sense that kind of tension, that struggle between my dad and this murderer. And I think that tension is always present for Graham. He works really hard to find a way to deal with that internal conflict, which at times can be very difficult for him.
As the details of the case started to emerge and the horror in which Carol had died and the circumstances under which she had died, people couldn't believe it. You know, how could this happen right under their noses?
After police had found Carol's body love letters that Harry Jarvis had sent to Rita were discovered in the house.
Harry shows that he had every intention of killing Carol because of the content of the letters that he sent Rita. That in and of itself is very juvenile.
One said, "The drugs are doing the job. Just took longer than I thought, but going fast now." Another claimed, "Carol is dying as I write. Then we have the house to ourselves and sell all in it to move on. Dangerous times, but we will get there."
We can see Harry's intention with the letters that he was writing to Rita. There is definitely premeditated behavior at play here. So this wasn't a crime of passion, this was a crime of planning.
Harry's trial began on January 31st, 2011. He pleaded not guilty, and the true horrors of the crime played out in court.
There was no established cause of death, but the circumstances pointed to Harry having a major involvement in the deterioration of her health, creating a set of circumstances with the administration of medication or maladministration of medication, which contributed to that.
Harry was already drugging Carol. He anticipated that he would be able to get rid of her fairly quickly. After Carol passed away, Harry wrapped her body in a duvet and put her under a gap in the floorboard. And he told the police that he'd put Carol there to keep her close to him. I mean, he tried to claim that Carol had died from natural causes.
Hiding her in the way that he did and saying she died of natural causes just shows a real lack of remorse.
Carol was identified through DNA from her fingertips because there had been such a decomposition of the body. The post-mortem could not show any cause of death and how Harry did it.
Harry Jarvis wrote notes which were produced in evidence, and the prosecution relied on those notes. They were crucial to the prosecution case to show some degree of evil intent on his part and some intention to act to the detriment of his wife's health. And, as the prosecution argued, his intention was to kill her. The jury concluded that all the evidence was such that a clear inference could be drawn beyond reasonable doubt that Harry was responsible for her death. Harry Jarvis was eventually convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Even after the verdict, Harry remained silent about the murder.
We'll never know as to what happened, what made him do it, or how he done it. If he stabbed her or shot her, then that's like clean cut, but it was never a case of it was clean cut as to what had happened.
Graham, as an adult, has to come to terms with. His father murdered his mother and buried her body in the house. That his father had a mistress living in the shed and had planned to get rid of Carol and run off with Rita. That his father was basically a criminal hidden in plain sight, and this is the person you call Dad. This would be mind-blowing for Graham to wrap his head around all these multiple narratives about this one man. This is my dad. I loved him as a child. And these are the things that he did as a result of his behavior.
Rita Hayster instructed a member of my firm who instructed me as solicitor advocate to defend her for the charge of murder.
5 months later, on June 15th, Rita Hayster stood trial at Edinburgh High Court, charged with murder and attempting to defeat the ends of justice.
DNA, identified as being that of Rita Hayster, was found at the edge of the trapdoor leading down to the cellar area below the living room where the body of Harry Jarvis had found. That doesn't necessarily mean that Rita Hayster was there, but it did link her physically to the premises and to the vicinity where the body was found. But the finding of her DNA in the house, together with all the other circumstances, led the jury to convict her of the charge of attempting to defeat the ends of justice. And she was sentenced to 4.5 years imprisonment for that. But of course, the murder charge did not apply to her.
In 2017, 6 years into his life sentence, 67-year-old Harry Jarvis died in prison of heart failure.
Graham and his siblings would have felt this huge loss with their mother, but also with their father. So there will be lots of complex feelings here and trying to figure out that relationship and where it stands after that point. Harry dying in prison might not have brought closure to his family because he didn't serve much of his sentence.
Because you've lost both of them, you're not really angry, you're more sad at the overall situation. It all did get on top of me, and then I've done some mental health therapy stuff, CBT and that, which helped. Still have, I still have the odd nightmare and that about the basement and the floor, and I'm not be able to get rid of it at all. Life goes on, eh?